Minister for Defence, Dr. Ng Eng Hen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let me thank the members for their continued support to build up a strong defence for Singapore by voting for the financial policy of the government yesterday. This debate and the next on the presidential address after Parliament reopens are crucial. For this debate, as expected, any proposed tax increase will attract attention. If it didn't, we'll be in a different world, a surreal one. But astute members of Parliament have pointed out that the financial budget is but a means to an end. Indeed, apart from the financial scrutiny of government spending and revenue, the debates will set strategic directions for Singapore over the next 10, 20 years and beyond. And these core issues are addressed at a crucial juncture as we transit to a fourth-generation leadership that must forge support from a generation of Singaporeans with perspectives and memories significantly different from the pioneer generation and even that of their parents, because they were born when Singapore was a first world and they didn't experience a third world Singapore. As we deliberate on these key issues, I think we have to decide what we must never let go, lest we weaken the foundations of our growth, and what we must change to keep relevant with the times. And those decisions from these two debates will affect every Singaporean, young or old, right or wrong. Every ministry, therefore, including and especially defense, which takes up a large share of government spending, must deal with these core issues. That's the core debate. Mr. Vikram Nair captured the essence when he asked of my ministry what are our security plans in the face of wide-ranging threats and risk, and if our defense spending is adequate and sustainable. He used the word existential twice, and he's correct. Should we continue to put defense spending as a priority? Because after all, we've had peace for 50 years and more now. Our relations with our neighbors are good on all sides. We have formed strong partnerships, as members have pointed out, with major powers. How much should we invest in building a strong SAF? How much can we afford? The answer to these questions by previous generations was plain, as it was unwavering. Defense was a top priority, and they would invest heavily into building a strong defense, a strong SAF, no ifs or buts. But let me make one fact clear. Past generations did so even when there were many competing needs. We talk about our rising needs, but past generations, as a third world country in Singapore, our needs then were dire and everywhere. Houses, schools, hospitals, roads, public facilities, jobs, all in short supply. And because our military capabilities at independence were next to nothing, the government of the day had to make hard decisions. Every dollar spent on building up the military was a dollar taken from other needs. And yet, they paid the price to build up a strong SAF. Why? Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and the pioneer generation who lived through Singapore as a British colony under Japanese occupation and as a part of Malaysia held a deep conviction on self-determination through a strong defense. At every NDP which members here attend, we replay a particular clip of Mr. Lee's. It's a very stern admonition, and in this coming NDP, I invite you to listen to it again. And it was uttered in 1967, when NS was introduced. Quote, "If you who are growing up do not understand that you have got to defend this, then I say in the end we will lose. Other people will come, smack you down, take it over, unquote. I can't say as harsh as Mr. Lee, because that generation lived through difficult times. It's just unnatural for us. But when he says it, and when the pioneer generation says it's so authentic, harsh words for harsh times, but ever so necessary, not only for that generation, but I think for every generation. So listen to that clip again this year. And with that deep conviction and sacrificial commitment, we today have a modern and professional SAF. From 2 infantry battalions, which, if you read Mr. Lee's memoirs, were still under Malaysian command even after we separated. We now have an army, combined arms divisions, fully manned and able to move at short notice. Earlier this year, you may or may not have noticed, we activated a mass mobilization exercise. There was not much fanfare. In fact, it may have gone unnoticed. But in a few hours, we were able to rapidly assemble and equip 8,000 men, move munitions to them, and we use new ways of doing it. So many of you here are NS men and have gone through MOBEX. And as they went to the counters, these were automated counters, takes a picture of you, recognizes you, issues you a slip to say which company and which platoon you go to and what your role is and what weapons you need to draw. But you actually don't have to draw the weapons, because at the same time, when it's activated, we didn't cheat. We activated both sides from our ammunition storage facilities. They are activated, and they push weapons, platforms to meet up with the men. Within a few hours, 8,000 men. No mean feat anywhere. That should give a lot of confidence to members in this House and Singaporeans outside. From 2 Cessnas, and the RSAF celebrates or commemorates its Golden Jubilee this year. But when it started, we had 2 Cessnas. We didn't really own them. We leased them from the Singapore Flying Club. Today, we have a fleet, a comprehensive fleet of fighter, transport, surveillance aircraft, ground-based air defense systems that protect our skies 24/7. And when I say that, it means that we have pilots on standby, because after 9/11, we took that threat seriously. And if there are planes that come to us unplanned, our fighter planes are mobilized. But it takes a while to get mobilized. And so our chaps are there. And from time to time, we gently guide down errant, sometimes lost pilots down to the field. But you never know when there might be a real attack, just like 9/11. Our Navy started with 2 wooden hull boats, probably sinkable if attacked. We now have a modern Navy of littoral mission vessels, frigates, submarines that protect our waters in maritime harbor. The commitment of previous generations to build up a strong SAF was not merely through words or aspirations. It required substantial financial resources from the government and the people. But that was not the only, and in fact not the most precious resource they had to give. They gave of themselves. As every Singaporean male, as every male MP in this House who has done NS has done so, through national service with the full support from family and employees. The results of that unequivocal commitment are plain for everyone to see, to Singaporeans, to our neighbors, and indeed globally. An SAF today that is able to defend Singapore, but beyond that, an SAF that has contributed to global security. As Mr. Vikram Nayan say, how do we show that we are a valued partner? It went beyond our wildest imagination that SAF troops and assets, as Mr. Teo Ser Luck pointed out, were helping in Hurricane Harvey in Texas, and before that, Hurricane Katrina, or could be deployed as peacekeepers in Timor-Leste or against terrorism in Afghanistan and Iraq, against pirates in the Gulf of Aden, in humanitarian efforts in Aceh and Nepal. Who would have thought of it when SAF was started more than 50 years ago? Yes, we will continue to do this because the partnerships forged from playing our role internationally are important in dealing with transnational threats that affect our own security. We are not playing good guy, to be honest. It raises our stakes, our value to others who want then to help us as we deal with transnational security threats. It has been the steady investments in defense spending that enable these achievements by a strong SAF, both locally and internationally. This is a committee of supply debate. So I think some details of actual financing are appropriate. And we've handed out, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, charts. The first figure, and I'll show them as well on the screens, shows our defense spending for the last 30 years. First off, in blue, as a percentage of government expenditure, how much MINDEF spends as part of government expenditure. At our height, you will notice that we spent almost a third of all every dollar the government spends. But with the SAF modernized and doing more with people and technology, defense spending as a proportion dropped substantially, starting around a decade ago. It is now 19% of government spending. So much for Singapore spending. But defense must always be seen as perspective. What you spend is never as important what everyone else spends. So let's see the next slide. What of defense spending by countries around us? I've chosen just to focus on ASEAN, but I think probably the same can be said of Asia, ex-ASEAN and Singapore, and even more. Figure 2 shows that we've kept pace with ASEAN spending until about 2006. In the last decade, our ASEAN neighbors have been spending more, and these are in nominal, absolute spending. In the last decade, our ASEAN neighbors have been spending more to modernize their defense capabilities, even as their economies grew. The gap between Singapore's spending compared to the rest of ASEAN has increased, but Singapore need not increase its defense spending radically now to play catch-up. But don't worry, we don't have to do that. As I said in this House previously, we can maintain the SAF's capabilities with a defense spending that roughly keeps pace with inflation, around 3 to 4% increase each year. And even for the next decade, MINDEF does not foresee any spike in defense spending. Obviously, this will not apply if there are exigencies or unexpected scenarios. For instance, if there's a terrorist attack or if the security environment deteriorates, our agencies will have to spend more to protect Singaporeans. And after the next decade, I think it would be prudent for the government of that day and this House to reassess the security threats and the military spending and the capabilities of other countries and plan ahead. So, if you can remember and you are still in this House 10 years hence, 2028 and beyond, please remember this gentle admonition, sound out warnings if you think necessary, for those of you who will be privileged to be in this House. Two crucial lessons learned from our experiences, as well as that from negative examples from other countries who went the other way. And they are, first, the best time to prepare for trouble is during peace. Second, in the long run, steady investments into military capabilities maintain peace through deterrence and results in more effective outcomes. It is actually the most effective yield for defense investments. In other words, even if you spent the same dollar amount over a defined period, and one had a gentle, smooth, and the other one went up and down, the most effective yield is continuous, steady investments. And I'll tell you why. By examples. which many European countries have learned in bitter ways. So I recently spoke of how Lithuania did away with national service after the Cold War, but has now to reintroduce it following the annexation of Crimea. But it may not be possible. Just think, one defense minister decides, all right, NS is no longer necessary. The same one, or a few years later, or another one, probably another one, decides, let's reintroduce it. Okay. Is it possible? Certainly not in time to deal with an imminent crisis. Denmark announced in October last year they would now increase defense spending by 20% over the next 5 years. You can quickly appreciate the pain it will cause their population. That, the finance minister of Denmark will say, I have to raise GST 2% just to pay for my defense. Painful. France, even a bigger problem. Our Minister of Finance will be very happy to hear this. Unveiled a bill last month that would increase the spending on its armed forces by more than 40% by 2025. Because Europe has now got threats. People are asking France and Germany, who are the two largest powers, to do more. They're going to up it. President Macron, to his credit, believes that it should be done, but they have to up their defense spending by 40%. I haven't calculated how much it affects their defense spending. I think France now spends 36 billion euro. It will have to go up to 50 billion euro, 14 billion in 7 years, an increase. Not only just a 2% GST, probably a 3, a 4, a 5% GST just to pay for increase in defense spending. Germany, even with its troubled past, is now asked by EU states to do more militarily. That debate is over. I've attended Munich Security Dialogue, as many as defense ministers in Singapore have for the past decade or more. And at that time, there was almost a schizophrenia. We think we want Germany to do more. But with your troubled past, maybe you shouldn't do more. That debate is done. Germany, you must do more. But after 25 years of cuts to the German defense budget, the German military, the Bundeswehr, is underfunded, with entire weapon systems unusable because they either lack spare parts or have been poorly maintained. By the German government's own assessment, less than half of Germany's submarines and planes are operationally ready. The platforms are there, but only half can be activated. When the Aceh tsunami occurred, we activated 3 of our 4 LSTs. It happened on Boxing Day. No way you could have a prior warning. On activation, all move. 75% of the asset of that particular platform. The Bundeswehr, the 4th was in the Gulf, as DPMTO reminded me. So all 4 were out. If we had to send another one, we'll have to borrow it. The Bundeswehr will need many years to modernize its platforms to make up for lost time. When I share these lessons, I say these are salutary lessons that we must voraciously imbibe because someone else has paid to learn them. That's the cheapest cost to any country. We intend to keep our defense spending steady, despite countries around us spending more and against a wide-ranging security threats. But we have to prioritize and focus and optimize our resources. Some members have asked about counterterrorism. Professor Faisal Muhammad, Ms. Dr. Fatima Latif. And the SAF takes terrorism very seriously, so much so that we have to reorganize, train, and equip differently. And members have pointed out, including Professor Teo Pin, how we now we have the capacity to train 18,000 SAF NS men for homeland security. We learned valuable lessons from Marawi, another painful lesson that someone else learned. So we went there, we absorbed the lessons. I made a trip, DPMTO made a trip recently, where they found out, and they admit that they underestimated the problem, both the number of fighters and how well they were equipped. The terrorist fighters there were equipped. Snipers had good weapons, heavy machine guns, and they even had anti-tank weapons. And the terrorists conducted urban warfare against soldiers and policemen of the Philippines authorities who were not trained for that kind of fight. That's why it took 5 months for the Philippine Armed Forces and Homeland Security to dislodge the militants from that city. And this after many lives lost and the city devastated. I think the bill they have recently estimated will cost about $2 billion, US billion. This is just one small city. It was an area of probably by 400 meters. That's the area. The experiences there confirm that the SAF is on the right track in building up our counterterrorism capabilities. In the span of a year, we have trained some 18,000 servicemen for Homeland Security, and we started a new institute called the Island Defense Training Institute. I talked about Safety City last year. When completed, it will allow our soldiers to train more realistically for Homeland Security and counterterrorism, because it will be a different Pasir Laba that you and I were used to. Buildings, I don't know how high we can build it, but at least higher than what we have now, and to teach them how to fight in that kind of scenario. Members rightly pointed out that we have to do more with other government agencies to respond to these terror threats, and we are working together with the Police Frontline Policing Training Center, and will conduct joint training and equip NS-men with the skills to perform these Homeland Security operations. At sea, various agencies are coordinated, whether it's the Navy, the Police Coast Guard, Maritime Port Authority, ICA, so that we keep our waters safe. But as much as we prepare at home, Singapore needs to be part of the international effort to deal with terrorism at its source. That's a sound strategy, because if you don't do that, you are just dealing with the problem too late, and you allow the problem to mushroom. And we did that against Al-Qaeda from 2007 in Afghanistan, after which the threat had dissipated for now. Our SAF troops have been deployed in Iraq since 2014 against ISIS, and with considerable progress. The coalition effort led by the United States has taken Iraq back from ISIS control. US Secretary of Defense James Mattis wrote to me recently to ask Singapore to commit more resources for the next phase of consolidation after our hard-won victories. Cabinet has approved for Singapore to maintain our commitment to counterterrorism globally for our own interests. And I'm announcing today that the SAF will further deploy troops to Iraq later this year. We will send SAF troops to help train Iraqi security forces to counter improvised explosive devices, as well as in tactical weapons and combat tactics. As Associate Professor Fatima Latif suggested, we need to work with ASEAN on counterterrorism. And some others have pointed that out too, including Mr. Pritam Singh and Mr. Lotiakian. Especially because the risk of foreign fighters leaving Iraq and Syria has gone up. So paradoxically, as the problem there diminishes, they run away and they come back. Whether it's Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, or Singapore, or even Singapore. The Philippines Special Command, Operations Command came to Singapore last December for a 2-week professional exchange. And our offer to the Philippines Armed Forces to use our UAVs for surveillance remains open. DPMTO, when they visited Philippines leaders, reiterated that offer too recently. The Singapore Armed Forces stands ready to join the Sulu Seas Patrol when invited. And as ADMM Chair, we recently proposed a counterterrorism framework. There were many programs, but we felt we needed a comprehensive framework, and we devised the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, the equivalent: resilience, response, recovery, to coordinate our responses and deal with and recover from attacks. Dr. Lim Wee Kiat asked about the growing cyber threat. Indeed, a transnational threat that has effects that could be devastating as physical attacks, whether it's power grids, whether it's financial grids, whether it's hospitals, so on and so forth. At the whole of government level, DPMTO chairs our coordinating inter-ministerial committee, the SPRC, Security Policy Committee. But at ministry level, there are also, we are responsible for our own ministries as well as the ecosystem which that ministry is in charge of. Members have asked who the attacks come from, how often, and who are they targeted at. I think you can guess at the answer. The attacks are conducted by freelancers as well as organized state and non-state actors. And senior MINDEF and SAF leaders, as well as departments handling sensitive information, have been deliberately targeted, for example, by spear phishing. Those of you in IT will know what this is. In other words, you get innocent-looking emails addressed to you, but it contains malicious software. If you click on it, the attachment, or sometimes even if you click on it, I don't think they've reached a stage where you look at it and the malicious software can come. It might come. They have not succeeded, but they will keep trying. So as we do in the physical arena, MINDEF adopts a multi-layered approach to cyber defense, including the ultimate step of physically separating sensitive systems from the internet, which our system is currently. Internally, there's a system, but we don't want to talk to you. Please don't come in. Sensors monitor our internal networks 24/7. We have red teams which are testing for vulnerabilities. Mr. Zainal Sapari asked about our bug bounty program. Thank you for affirming it. I thought it was a good idea, but it attracted 260 white hat hackers, all bona fide, I think. And improve our systems, as you rightly pointed out, at relatively low cost. And we've shared lessons with other agencies like government, GovTech, and CSA, and I think the results are encouraging. I don't think it's a one-off. It may not be an exact mode, but we'll think of these ways to crowdsource, and because for the internet you can do it. You can crowdsource and actually leverage off the connectivity. And as members have pointed out, we'll build up a cyber force with more SAF regulars and full-time staff. And we'll also use NSMen. This year, we're taking the pilot batch of NSFs under the Cyber NSF scheme. For those of you who have friends or children of friends interested and suitable, tell them about this. And for those interested and suitable, after their NS has finished, we'll offer them regular contracts of varying durations. And if they accept, we'll invest more in training them, and we'll also set up a cyber defense training and exercise infrastructure to train this. So this is a long-term need, needs a long-term plan, and we've begun. Mr. Teo Salak asked how we can be prudent in spending, and he's spot on. We know our resources are limited, we have to be prudent. But we won't compromise. The SAF will not compromise our defense capabilities, but we found ways to optimize resources. We want to stretch every dollar where we can. We've used innovation, better work processes. The SAF saved about 200 million last year, the highest in the last 4 years. I think we can do more. For instance, our new littoral mission vessels will cost around 65 million less for the whole fleet to maintain across their lifetime. They replace the patrol vessels. The LMVs are much more capable than the patrol vessels, but will cost less. Why? Because they have less crew, they're more efficient to maintain. The RSAF's aerostat, our big balloon. Yesterday there were some discussions about floating balloons. Let me just say that when SAF floats balloons, it's there to stay and it's meant to be up. Our aerostat achieves continuous aerial surveillance, just like a plane with a radar, but saves about 29 million a year. It's a jolly good idea. The SAF upgrades existing equipment where possible to avoid buying new platforms. Our first instinct is not to buy, upgrade. And that's what we did for our whole fleet of Leopard tanks and Chinooks. We must harness new technologies, as Dr. Teo Ho Pin pointed out. Because even if you chose to give us more money in exchange for manpower. We can't do it. We just don't have the manpower. We recognize that as an inherent constraint, and we started to deal with it, I think, probably 1, even 2 decades ago, in terms of redesigning our systems, in terms of maintaining our systems. Let me give you some examples. Dr. Teo Ho Pin mentioned that the older ORNS men, those in their 60s, won't be so adept. We're not planning to induct them into our armed forces because your liability is the 40 to 50, but thank you for the idea, Dr. Teo will consider it. But of those who are in our orbit, there are some examples. So instead of soldiers conducting surveillance from observation towers, the Army will build unmanned towers to watch over Jurong Island and the surrounding waters. Those towers will watch 24/7, all weather, and it will reduce the number of soldiers required by a third, significant number. The RSAF is moving towards a smart airbase. What's a smart airbase? For example, it will use drones to perform runway damage. Now, you notice, for instance, the recent air show, you know, it's beautiful to watch, and people clap in glee, but after the fighter planes take off or land, you've got to do visual checks to make sure that the commercial planes can come in too. Same thing for each. You have to do visual checks, because even small debris make a difference. So we can use drones to perform runway damage assessment and respond to other intruding drones. We want to make it more efficient automation for aircraft maintenance and use sensors for pre- and post-flight aircraft checks. I think it's achievable, and we're doing trials to achieve that kind of smart airbase. The Navy is integrating data from all agencies. The maritime environment is a different environment from the air. There are lots of moving parts, different agencies. And you want to gather data from all sources, construct better algorithms to detect anomalies, and then preempt, say, possible terrorist threat from the sea. And for surveillance, we want to use cameras with smart sensors with automated surveillance. You don't need so much a man in the loop or the man in every loop to say, this vessel is behaving in a different way from other vessels, to just alert you so that the man in the loop suddenly decides, makes the decisions whether you respond to. And you don't need manned vessels for some scenarios. Unmanned vessels will soon be used for patrols and underwater surveys. All this gives us hope that we're moving towards an SAF that is just or more, or even more effective, but can use less manpower. We agree wholeheartedly with members here who pointed out that we can't do this alone. We have to join other partners and other countries. Ms. Jessica Tan, Mr. Loh Tia Kiang, Mr. Pritam Singh. Thank you for affirming that what we decided for as ADMM chair this year is important. We said there will be 3 areas: counterterrorism, confidence building measures, which will cues unplanned encounters at sea and in the air, and the third was chemical, biological, and radiological threat. That was really precipitated because of the Korean Peninsula instability, and most countries are not prepared for those kind of threats. As members pointed out quite rightly, the cues for sea has been accepted. What's the possibility of a cues for air being accepted? It's a tough one. I agree with you. But if you can do it, 18 nations, I think it'll send a very strong signal. So we'll try. We'll at least start the ball rolling, see whether we can get consensus from the 10 countries, ASEAN countries. I think we can achieve that, and the +8. I think among some of them, they'll be more willing. And if we can talk to them and say, this works for you, I think we would have done a significant contribution. Some asked about the exercise, Mr. Loh, whether we are practicing cues, Mr. Pritam Singh as well. Indeed, we are. We don't even have to wait for the China-ASEAN Maritime Exercise. We're going to do it to all 18 ADMM countries to practice cues at sea, because they have agreed collectively to adopt cues and practice it in our exercise in 2019. And in 2018, I suspect this year with China, it may be in undisputed water, so there won't be a chance to practice it. You've asked whether the meetings, the ADMM Plus, will be yearly. Indeed, it will, from this year onwards. They've agreed, and Singapore will be the first to host these annual meetings. With the US, we've achieved new milestones. Both the RSN and RSAF conduct bilateral exercises in Guam for the first time last year, flying the US PACCAV and exercising across the full spectrum of anti-submarine, anti-surface, anti-war, anti-air warfare of the US Navy. With China, we'll build up on the positive momentum from the visit of Chinese Defense Minister Chang Wan-chien early this year, and we'll deepen ties with the PLA. With India, we concluded a Navy bilateral agreement and will increase maritime security cooperation between our countries, especially around the Andaman Seas. For Australia, we'll construct SAF training facilities in Queensland, due to begin in 2019. So we'll build strong partnership, but all of us here know that ultimately, we Singaporeans must be accountable for our own defense. When we depended on others, it failed. As our NS men will be better trained through new facilities in the SAF, Southeast City, and in Australia, and with continued investments, steady year after year, which members of this House approve, the SAF will continue its transformation onwards. And the next generation SAF will use game-changing technologies, new fighting concepts. On the ground, they will operate unmanned autonomous systems, multiply their forces. Our skies will be better protected with advanced weapon systems. We've recently added our S-30, which are here. Our territorial waters and sea lines of communication will be better secured with manned and unmanned vessels alike. That's the vision. That's what we're investing in. And we'll be equipped to deal with ever-evolving cyber threats. Mr. Chairman, let me conclude. That members of this House voted for the budget this year, yesterday, sends a strong signal to our own people and to the world. In doing so, we have kept faith with that which we were entrusted to by a previous generation. A strong SAF able to ensure our independence and protect Singaporeans. But that strong SAF was not built or maintained by happenstance or even good intentions. For each generation, it will require a conscious, a deliberate decision. It will require sacrifices to commit resources and of themselves. Previous generations took that hard decision. As Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said to SAF officers, it was at the Temasek Society dinner in 2012, quote, "From the day we started, I knew that we needed a strong SAF, and I believe that still remains today. Without a strong SAF, there is no economic future. There is no security," unquote. The members of this House who voted for the budget yesterday united themselves with this belief and the resolve of the pioneer generation. If each generation reaffirms and renews its commitment, then a strong SAF will continue to keep Singapore safe and sovereign with a secure future for another generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.